Alright, so welcome back to the channel. We are ready for part 3 of the S85 M5 M6 Rod bearing change. So, what we will be doing in this episode here is actually doing the rod bearing change. To just kind of go over the process that we'll be following. First thing we need to do here is remove the oil pickup tubes out of the oil pump. Basically, we got T30s here that are holding them in. A few up in this corner holding the end up. And then we will begin one by one pulling the rod caps off, spinning the bearings out, and putting the new ones in. What I generally do is I don't necessarily go in order from one end to the other, even though that is kind of the recommended way. What I do is I only rotate the engine over once, and as each set comes down, I replace them, and then I use a paint marker and mark that they've been done. That way I don't get it confused. That way I only have to rotate the engine over once versus once for every set if you were to start at one end. So the thing we will be using, let's see if I can find the parts. We've got oil pan gasket here along with the new bolts, and I will go get the bearings and the bolts that we'll be using as well and show them to you here in a second. Alright, so here is what we are going to be working with. We got our ARP rod bolts, we got some of their assembly lube that you want to put on the threads of the bolts to get your proper torque spec out of them. And then there we've got the rod bearings. These are the BE bearings. They are, I believe, let's see, might be on here. That's just the ARP stuff. I believe these are the plus 1,000ths to give you a little bit more clearance. There's the uppers, there's the lowers. Pull one out just to take a quick look at. So that is what the new shells look like. So yeah, the uppers are this, or the lowers are the standard. Let's pull one of the uppers out. So yeah, 0.025 millimeters greater, which I think is roughly 1,000th of an inch. So that is what we're going to be working with. Let's get this stuff back in here and start disassembling. So I'm going to go ahead and get this stuff cleaned out. It should have sat all night, so most of the excess oil should have dripped off of there, maybe a little easier to work on. And we will be ready to keep going. It looks, this car has Vanos codes, it's idling rough. So I do also have Vanos solenoids for it, but now getting it apart here, it looks like it does have a brand new high pressure pump. So this car obviously had issues. Most likely they weren't able to resolve it, and so they just sold the car. This car, the owner that currently owns it just bought it. So this is kind of interesting looking at it here. We've got a new high pressure pump here. So somebody was obviously in here trying to fix the issue and obviously didn't get it fixed. So moving on from here, we are going to be doing the solenoids and see what that does for us. So anyway, let's get started and see what we can get done today. Using the correct orientation and right cap to rod is extremely important. If you look at this, these are actually broken. They're not cut, so they have a precise pattern that has to be matched to the rod. When they are fit together, you can pretty much not see any joint. So if a person was to flip these or move them around, your engine pretty much would not last long at all. Because obviously you would not have anywhere close to the right clearance. So now, that is our old one. We'll just go ahead and pop bearing out just like that. And we are ready to push the rod up, roll the top one out, and then continue with the reassembly of this one. You want to be very careful when you're doing this not to nick the crankshaft. It is pretty hard, but you can scratch it if you're using screwdrivers or anything like that. Just going to get up in there real carefully and start working this top one out. There we go. There is the top one. You can see the amount of wear we got on there. This car only has 62 or 4,000 miles on it. I can't remember exactly, but it's low 60,000 miles. We can already see the wear on those bearings. So now we'll clean everything up a little bit, roll the new bearing in there, and get started on the other side here. Alright, so here we have a new upper shell. You can see there's a little notch in here that's got to be fit into the rod up there. If we look, show you on the cap here, you can see this little thing there. That is where that little, kind of like, it's almost like a keyway, but it's just a little indent that's got to fit in there. And so the rod, if we would look at it from the top, the rod would be here. We're going to go and roll that up in there like that. Now obviously this is the upper and this is the lower cap, but it's the same principle. Get up in there and pull the rod down on top of it. That kind of protects the crank and the rod as you drop it down on. Again, you just want to take your time, make sure everything is done right and you don't scuff and scratch either the crank or the rod. Mainly the crank. This surface here is very critical that it stays clean. So now we have the top one on. We're going to move on to the bottom and clean some of the oil residue on. We don't need any lubrication between here and the rod, the shell. That is not supposed to be moving. So now we're going to take our lower one and again line up the keyway there, our little retainer, push it in there, center it up, make sure it's seated, and then we're going to apply some assembly glue. Alright, so here is our directions from ARP. Using the stretch method is by far the most accurate. However, in the car here it's a little tougher to do, so we are going to go with the 50 foot-pounds using the Ultra Torque faster lubricant. So that's got to go on the threads to make sure you get that you can get the torque without any resistance from a dry thread. So hopefully you'll be able to see that. And again, when we go to put this together, double check to make sure you're putting it on in the right orientation. You don't have it flipped or anything like that. Pretty easy to tell. This little keyway again lines up with the like opposite of the one up on the top, but on the same side. And you can also tell when you put them together, they should nicely, without any pressure, go together to where you pretty much can't see any joint. If it doesn't, you know you have some type of an issue going on, and you want to check into that before you torque them. Now, if you're using the ARP bolt, they're a completely different size than the OEM one, so it's going to be pretty easy to tell which one we do, so I might not mark them at this point. If I'm using OEM bolts, what I will do, if I can find it here, don't see it here, but I'll take if I'm using OEM bolts that look similar to the OEM bolts that are on the cars, I'll take a paint marker and just make a mark on the head of the bolt showing that I did that one and also that I have it torqued. I'll wait till after I have it torqued to actually mark it. So I will run them down by hand, make sure everything goes smoothly, and again you can check your joint here, make sure it's completely nice and together without, you pretty much should not be able to see where it was. It's completely together. So now I know that everything is together the way it should be, and we are ready to torque it. So a good torque wrench is very, very important. We're going to go switch over to foot-pound, drop it down to 50, and we are ready to torque. Another thing to note is you don't want to be using a bunch of extensions when you're torquing, because that will throw off your torque reading. The flex in an extension, so we will just be using the socket, and if you need to use an extension, make sure you use the shortest one possible. So I'm just going to work them back and forth kind of equal, make sure we have go ahead and double check that. And there we go, that is the first one done right there. So move on to the next one, and this one here I'm going to have to rotate it down just a little bit to bring that down to where we can do it, or we can also move on to this one. So again, the benefit of doing it this way is you don't have to rotate the engine over for every single one. You just got to make sure that you don't skip any. So either mark them, or in our case with the ARP bolts, they're different size than the others. It makes it pretty easy to tell which one we have and which one we haven't done. Get a better view here. Here we can see what the OEM bolts look like. The big difference between the OEM bolts and the ARPs is the torque sequence. With the OEM bolts, they're a stretch type bolt, so you have, I think it's 3 series of, you have initial torque, and then you do 3 torques by degrees. So it's a lot more time consuming, a lot more room for error, especially doing it in the car if you are not very careful and use a lot and accurate. So that's why the main reason why I like using the ARP. It's just one torque sequence and you're done. One thing you can use is the bolt. Kind of wiggle it and it'll come right loose. Here we go. Normally the lowers don't have that much wear, since the most force is obviously from the top down due to the compression, or due to the firing of the cylinder. All the torque is applied to the top. So the bottom ones generally look okay. Set that one aside and just go up in here, push the rod up just a little bit. And carefully work it out of there. Just drop it down on top of the crank, and then we can rotate it down and out. Here we go. Again, we were just getting into the copper there. So definitely time to do it. Again, nice little layer of assembly lube. Make sure this little stop is in the right side, and then we're gonna, again, roll it up in there. Other way, if it's kind of difficult to get up in there, you can take an old rod bolt, thread it in. Just again, make sure you don't have it touching the crank surface. Getting close, we're gonna pop that one out. Make sure everything's even, and pull it down tight against the crank. Just like that. Alright, you can take your fingernail and just kind of make sure that if you need to push the shell one way or the other, you can just take your fingernail up there and push it. You kind of want it, if anything, you want it a little low on this side because it will automatically find its place with that tab. If you have it up too far that way, the tab will actually be binding and keeping the rod from coming down the whole way. The other thing I didn't mention on the first one is you also want to put some of the ARP assembly lube right on the bottom of the nut. That way you don't have friction on this surface when you're tightening it. So we got assembly lube on that one, got that shell in. Make sure everything is facing the right way. And again, make sure it's all good, and we can get our one bolt started there. Hopefully be able to see, but just by finger tightening this, you can basically not see any crack, just the most hairline of a crack there. That is what you want to see. Again, 50 foot-pounds, and we will kind of do it evenly as much as we can. So here, I'm going to be using an extension just to get by the bracket, when then the actual torque I will do without. So just for an experiment, I'll go ahead and torque it with the extension, and then we'll take the extension off and check the torque. Let's double check our torque with no extension. Still pretty close. A 4-inch extension really isn't gonna do a whole lot, but I still like doing it without, just to make sure I have the most accurate torque. Alright, so at this point, we've got all the ones that are currently accessible done. We're going to go ahead and throw a bar on the end of the crank here and rotate the engine over until we have another pair down to do. So for that, we're going to be using a 32mm open end. That gives you enough clearance to get up in here without dropping the fan or any of that stuff. Just take it nice and slow. Let the compression release as you turn it over. Alright, so that brought this cylinder and this one here. So that brought this cylinder and this one here down to where we can work on it. So I'm going to go ahead and break these two loose. This one too right away. You really want to be careful you don't go drop one of these caps. Again, I just put the bolt in a little bit. Wiggle a little bit and it'll drop right down. So that is bearing on the bottom on that side. That one definitely has more wear than the others. So again, to take it out, I just take my thumb, roll it right out. Pretty easy. Finger, you can push the rod up, no problem. Alright, so this is the last pair of rod bearings. Been going pretty good. Hopefully I had the camera in a way you were able to see, but let's get this last pair knocked out and we are ready to begin our reassembly. Alright, so we've completed our service on this car. Rod bearings are done, Vano solenoids are replaced, and we got the car running and we're doing a bleed procedure on the Vano system. So that's going to take roughly 18 minutes. You see it's revving the car up. Kind of doing its thing. The car's already running quite a bit better, so I have a pretty confident we most likely have got the issue solved. Before it ran very, very rough, but we're going to run through this procedure and then we'll see how it's running.